Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of May of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Kharkiv. From the northern part of the city, on this video for example we can see a parking lot, and a few seconds later we see 2 or 3 FABs arrived in the area. Those obviously were Russian FABs, not missiles, and as a result of the strike a very big mall was destroyed. The mall that Ukrainians were using to buy some construction materials for building houses, for making some different construction things, and many other purposes. Later we got more details and more videos from the Ukrainian sources. For example, on this video with the best quality we can see the results of explosions. We can see that the entire mall, the entire let's say shop was set on fire. We still don't receive any updates whether there were casualties, or let's say about the number of casualties from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to reduce the number of casualties because the main strike took place in the part where there was a warehouse. And currently we have two different points of view, of course. The Russians are saying that they attacked and destroyed the warehouses that the Ukrainians were placed in the back part of this mall. The Ukrainians are saying that there were nothing, and that the Russians attacked civilian area. Of course, currently we can't tell for sure whether the Russians are saying the truth or the Ukrainians are saying the truth, but the only thing I know for sure that the Ukrainians are going to use this case as the engine, as the breaking point in the beginning of Ukraine's greatest counteroffensive operation on Kharkiv direction. The Russian sources reported that during the previous few days to 10 days, the Ukrainians managed to concentrate up to seven brigades on this direction, and according to the Russian sources, it is 2 times more forces. These 7 brigades just on Kharkiv direction, let's say from Kharkiv to Liptsi, is 2 times more than the Russian forces managed to concentrate from Liptsi to Volchansk. So when talking about just Liptsi direction, that means that Ukrainians on this area managed to concentrate maybe 3 or 4 times more forces than the Russians who have in this area. And according to information we have, the Ukrainians have already started their greatest counter-Kharkiv offensive operation. This is exactly how they're calling this. We remember that Zelensky have already also started talking about these attempts. In the area of the village Liptsi, the Ukrainians made a significant attempts at counterattacks on the positions of Russian troops. Most of those attacks for now were repelled by the Russians, mainly by counterattacks of Ukrainian troopers by multiple launch rocket systems. So the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians in advance. The Ukrainians, after another strike, were forced to fall back. But now the Ukrainians are trying to discovered the main Russian artillery positions, and most likely during the next few hours and during upcoming night, the Ukrainians are going to make more attempts. So regarding the situation in Kharkiv, regarding the situation with the forces, I know for sure that the next night and the next few days are going to be very hot, at least on Liptsi area. The Ukrainians will make significant number of counterattacks. They have concentrated significant number of forces. They have redeployed significant number of forces from different directions in favor of Kharkiv area. And now the Ukrainians will start counterattacks. The main forces, the Ukrainians are concentrating in the forests between Kharkiv and Liptsi. The Russians understand this, so that's why the Russians are attacking this territory with flamethrower systems, with multiple launch rocket systems, with FABs, trying to set the forest on fire. What kind of conclusion we can make from this situation? First of all, the Russians were ready for this. So you need to understand that the Russian forces, the Russian garrison was limited on Kharkiv offensive operation, and the Russians from the beginning knew exactly what they were doing and what they were planning to achieve. And the most important goal that the Russians were trying to achieve is to get as close as possible to Liptsi, to capture as many as possible villages, and during the previous 10 days to create as many as possible let's say fortifications. For example, the Ukrainians during the previous few days published a lot of videos of how they bombing and attacking the Russian engineering equipments. For example, on this video we can see another Russian engineering, let's say, truck that was damaged and destroyed by the Ukrainian FPV drone. So you need to understand that this is not just engineering truck, this is engineering truck that was creating the trenches. So the Russians during the previous 10 days weren't attacking the Ukrainian forces. They weren't attacking them because they understand that their garrison is limited. But the Russians spent the previous 10 days to create as many as possible fortifications, minefields, lots of defense belts, trying to slow down the Ukrainians during Ukrainian counterattacks. So that's why the Ukrainians are so fast. That's why the Ukrainians are in a hurry, because they understand another day, another square kilometer or 10 square kilometers of minefields or of fortifications or of dragon teeth, because the Russians, there are less corruption than Ukraine. And if the Russians are building fortifications, they are building them well. So that's why the Ukrainians are in a hurry and they will attack. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are going to attack, let's say, at two directions at once at the same time in Gluboko Lukansi, as well as from Bielый Kolodец to Volchansk. I'm not sure about this, because the Ukrainians they haven't managed to regroup significant number of forces. They, at least when talking about Kharkiv, Liptsi, maybe they have finished regrouping here and they are ready to attack. But when talking about Volchansk, I'm not sure about this. I think that Ukrainians are still in the process of regrouping, and the main reason of that is the absence of railway connection. Kharkiv has railways with the mainland, and the Bielый Kolodец and Volchansk doesn't have this. So the Ukrainians to move forces here need to use local roads, bridges, pontoon bridges, and many other things that the Russians destroy regularly. But anyway, when talking about Volchansk, regarding the situation whether the Ukrainians are ready to counterattack or not, they have already started this process as well. For example, on this video, if the video is going to upload, on this video we can see how the Russians were bombing the court building in the central part of the northern Volchansk with FABs. So I'll remind you that just a few days ago the Russian sources published the video with the flag inside of this building, which confirmed that this building was already under Russian control, and now we see that the Russians are bombing this territory. To summarize everything, I think that most likely the Russians start falling back from the north, from the central Volchansk to the north, very slowly, step by step, let's say trying to use active defense, trying to deal as much as possible damage to the Ukrainians, but the Russians are falling back. And this is the reason why the Russians are trying to prepare their foothold on the eastern flank. This is the reason why the Russians are destroying the bridges, because they understand that this is the only way how the Ukrainians can redeploy forces to the north. But about the bridges is completely also a separate story. For example, from one side the Russians are destroying the bridges, but for some reason the Free Belarusian, let's say, corps volunteer corps destroyed the bridge in the vicinity of the village Tikhe. So they, as you can see, they have mined the bridge first of all at first, and then they destroy it, let's say, in a distance. So very difficult to understand why exactly they did that. Later we got report that most likely the Ukrainians, after they destroyed the bridge, abandoned their positions in Tikhe, and the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to establish complete control over the village. Probably we're going to receive confirmation of this update report tomorrow. But anyway, what was the purpose of destroying the bridge? Maybe the Ukrainians were afraid of further Russian attack to Vovchansky Hutory, but the question whether the Ukrainians managed to concentrate forces or not. So this is the main question. Currently we don't have the answer to this question, because a little bit further to the east, the Russians, for example, destroyed the bridge, not the Ukrainians. So we see something like thing that we don't understand. For one bridges was destroyed by the Ukrainians, other bridges were destroyed by the Russians, and both bridges were located on the same river. So at least for me, there is no logic in these actions, and for now we can't explain what exactly both sides are trying to achieve. Either both sides are afraid of attacks of each other, or what. So very difficult. Anyway, the situation in Volchansk still critical, but still controlled by the Russians and the Ukrainians. The clashes in the northern part is getting lower and lower, and both sides are preparing for long-term defense. So we'll see what is going to be next. Now let's move to the northern Kupyansk direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates from this territory as well. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have complete information, 100% confirmation that the Russians established complete control over the village by the name of Ivanivka. This information was confirmed by different sources, by Syriac mappers, by different pro-Russian sources, pro-Russian mappers, and according to information we have, at least at 3 p.m. of the local time, we got report that the soldiers of 47th Tank Division completely established control over the settlement in the Kupyansk direction, and they were talking about the village by the name of Ivanovka. Later we got the video with the Russians with the Russian flag inside of the village, which also also a confirmation of Russian control. So that's why, based on these videos, geolocations, different mappers, we have adjusted the map and colored the village under complete Russian control. Furthermore, we got reports that the Russians continue advancing further to the west, and as a result of first attacks, the Russians have already managed to deal some damage to the Ukrainians that are located in Stepovo-Novoselovka. Currently, we can't tell for sure whether the Ukrainians are able to hold defense belt or they will be forced to fall back even further to the west. Because once again, the stabilization of the situation in Kharkiv area, the Ukrainians managed to achieve by redeploying of significant number of forces from all over the entire Ukraine. And this is the reason why the Ukrainians during the previous just 10 days lost significant number of villages, positions, and so on. And the Ukrainians during the battle for Kharkiv are going to lose up to maybe 10 or 20 additional villages all over the entire line of combat contact until they are able to stabilize the situation completely, if they are able to do this at all. Now let's move further to the south. We got also lots of updates from Berestove. Different mappers are saying that the Russians managed to improve their positions and they control around 60 or even 70% of the village. But other pro-Russian sources are saying that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further to the south and or to the west in direction of the villages, either Stelmakhovka or Kruglyakhovka. So the Russians, as you can see now, we see a small artillery pocket. By this attack, the Russians are getting to the operational space, and now the Russians have chances and have everything they need to attack Stelmakhovka from behind, and either to encircle the Ukrainians or to force them to fall back from Stelmakhovka towards the village by the name of Lazova. Anyway, due to the situation in Kharkiv, we're going to see a significant intensifying of actions all over the entire Ukraine. Now let's move further to the south in direction of Chasiv Yar area. So we have also some updates from this territory. The Russians continue offensive operation. We got significant number of geolocations and videos from the area of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. The Ukrainians don't have possibilities to redeploy and evacuate armored vehicles from one bank of the river to another due to complete control over the canal by the Russian FPV drones. So that's why the Ukrainians suffer significant losses. On this series of videos, we can see significant number of armored vehicles that were destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strikes. On this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate the tank, but they couldn't do this because the canal was also under complete FPV drone control. The tank was set on fire. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to save the tank, but most likely the tank was destroyed. So as you can see, all these videos confirm one thing, that Ukrainians started the evacuation process. They started making attempts to evacuate as many as possible armored vehicles from the eastern Chasiv Yar to the central and to the western, trying to save the vehicles, armored vehicles and tanks as many as possible. But based on those geolocations and those videos, we can make a conclusions that most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to do this, and they will just waste some time and of course manpower and the personnel who would be involved in that evacuation process. So that means that also the days of eastern Chasiv Yar are numbered. Furthermore, some Russian sources, we can't tell you about whether the source is 100% reliable or not, but some Russian sources are saying that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt this way and to reach Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal on the northern flank of Chasiv Yar as well. So approximately this territory is already under Russian control as well, according to some different Russian pro-Russian mappers. Significant progress, and this information is confirmed. Then we can say about that the Chasiv Yar defense operation now is in a systematic crisis, not just like operational crisis or tactical crisis. This is a crisis of the entire system of defense, and which can lead to significant problems. Once again, the Ukrainians were forced to abandon significant number of positions in the vicinity of Klishchiivka, Avdiivka, in Chasiv Yar itself, with the purpose to, because they withdraw and because they redeployed significant number of forces to Kharkiv. Once again, another town, very important town, suffers significant problems and losses just in favor of Kharkiv situation. where the Russians operate with limited garrison, very small and limited garrison. And I would not be surprised that if by the end of June or July the Russians will abandon the borderlands completely and will return back to Belgorod, and Ukrainians will restore control over the border and something like this. But by the time the Ukrainians would lose Novomikhail, Konstantinovka, Ugledar, Chasiv Yar, Kalinovka, Krasnogorovka, and maybe Berestove, Ivanivka, Volchansk, many towns all over the entire Ukraine, just in favor of one town, Kharkiv, where the Russians are operating with a limited garrison. So this is exactly what is happening right now. So yes, don't have any doubts. On Kharkiv direction, the Russians are in defense state. A lot of engineering equipment was destroyed. The Russians show no progress, haven't been showing us any progress during the previous few days because they were digging in deeper. Now the Ukrainians are counterattacks, but the Russians have significant progress everywhere, but not in Kharkiv. And all these things are connected to each other. And everything is the consequences of decisions that Zelensky made during the previous days, because he decided to put in favor media victories than real victories on the ground. But the Russians, on the other hand, decided to invest more into operational and tactical success than just military companies all over the entire Ukraine. Furthermore, we got additional updates from the area between Ivanovska and Klishchiivka. The Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to establish control over another tree line towards the rich network of fortifications that located between Ivanovska and Klishchiivka. So the Russians are pushing on this direction, and this is probably the last stronghold, last defense belt of Ukrainians. If Ukrainians lose this area, then they will be forced to leave this side of Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal completely. Now let's move to Avdiivka. We have a lot of updates, and the most important are coming once again from Ocheretina area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, they managed to establish complete control over Arkhangelsk. It's a very strange and weird thing, because probably 3 weeks ago we got the first flags in the northern part, and most of the mappers have already updated the map in the vicinity of Arkhangelsk a long time ago, but just now the Russians reported about that. So but why is that? So why the Russians gave us this report so late? The thing is that if you remember the previous configuration of the map, you're going to remember that this stronghold used to be under Ukraine control. So most likely the Russians just today, on the 25th of May, managed to establish complete control over this stronghold. So that's why they gave us update about complete capturing of this territory. So I think that these things are related. Furthermore, we got some more updates about further Russian progress inside of Novoalexandrovka. Once again, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy significant number of forces from this direction to Kharkiv in favor of Kharkiv, and not in favor, in complete minus and expense of this direction, of losses of this direction. And we see that Ukrainians are not going to do anything with this. And as soon as significant number of forces were redeployed, the Russians started receiving significant progress on the ground. For example, according to different sources, the Russians have already bypassed up to 50% of Novoalexandrovka. So the clashes are taking place right now in the central part. We see the Russian drones are flying above this area without any resistance, without any electronic warfare suppression from the Ukrainian side. The Russians destroyed everything they want, everything that ran away from the central to the western part. So no resistance, and the Russians are moving further. We have more updates from Sokol. The Russians also improved their positions and got very close to Sokol from the west, so the battle for this territory is also about to start. The Russians are bombing Novopokrovsk, reducing the town to ruins, trying to get here also as close as possible. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Yasnobrodovka, and currently the distance between Yasnobrodovka and closest Russian positions is less than 500 meters. So this report we got yesterday, so most likely during the day the Russians made few attempts to attack the village, and maybe tomorrow the Ministry of Defense will report that Yasnobrodovka also, let's say, captured by the Russians. So once again, in favor of Kharkiv, the Ukrainians are losing significant number of very small towns and villages that has maybe no value when talking about every single one of them separately. But if we summarize everything, by the end of Kharkiv battle, the Russians may take up to 60 or 70 different villages, which is obviously a tactical success from the Russian side. So everything might happen. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from Krasnogorovka. Once again, the Ukrainians are abandoning their positions and running away from the village, from the stronghold, sorry. For example, we got another video from the central part, how the Russians raised another flag in this area, confirming complete Russian controls, that the area was secured, first of all, and completely captured by the Russians. The Ukrainians also show no resistance. They're just waiting for another order for evacuation or something like this. Now let's move further to the south in direction of Konstantinovka. We have significant number of icons, as you can see. The Russians continue pressure. The Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous days the main clashes were taking place in the central part, and that Ukrainians lost the battle for the central part. Now the Ukrainians try to show some resistance in the eastern part of Berestove, but the Russians have already launched and started pummeling this area with FPV drones, so I can't tell for sure how long the Ukrainians are able to hold the territory, but most likely the last defense built in Berestove days are also numbered. So maybe 2-3 days and the Ukrainians will start, let's say, defending themselves, let's say, in the northeastern part of Konstantinovka. Furthermore, the Ukrainians of 79th Brigade reported that they suffer significant problems with the communication. They're saying that the Russians somehow managed to find out a solution how to suppress and how to destroy Starlink communication. Sometimes, according to the Ukrainians, they don't have any connections with, let's say, each other, with the command centers, up to 10 or 15 hours. And this is not just like rumors or talks or speculations by 79th Brigade. Today we got like interview with Elon Musk, and either Elon Musk and New York Times confirmed that the Russians found the way how to suppress the Starlinks and how to make Ukrainians deaf and blind, and not just for half an hour, 1 hour, 5 hours, but for days. And I'll remind you that the Russians managed to achieve significant results during the previous first days of Kharkiv offensive operation, because the Ukrainians lost any connections with Starlink. They lost everything. They even didn't know what was happening on the line of combat contact. And now this story is taking place all over the entire territory of Ukraine. And Elon Musk said that he invests a lot of money for trying to find the solution how to fight with the Russian equipment. But as I understand, based on his words, even if he finds this approach, most likely he will not, present this approach to Ukrainians, because it's too expensive. It's too expensive, and he's first of all investor. He doesn't want to lose his, costs of his shares or something like this. He will keep this solution probably till the end of the special military operation, or will introduce in the final phase when Starlink is not going to be, something that can turn the situation in this or that favor. Now let's move further. We have reports from Urozhaina. The Russians continue offensive operation. Lots of explosions in Staromayorsk. Once again, the FABs are coming, the Toslin Tower systems. So the Russians preparing the foothold before final battle and the final rush. Most likely during the next few days, Staromayorsk will fall, and probably 4 or 5 days later, Urozhaina will fall as well. Rabotina, we haven't received anything from this direction, just regular activity. And we have some updates from Staromayorsk. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of geolocations, lot of videos of Russian FPV drone strikes and Russian artillery strikes. And if we increase the numbers of updates, let's say since the beginning of May, we can see that during the previous months there were pretty big activity from the Russian side. Lots of explosions, lots of FPV drone strikes, and the main focus is in the area to the north of Zherebyanki. As you can see, almost every single square kilometer was bombed by the Russians, which confirms that most likely the Russians are about to intensify their activity in this area and to start another, points of pressure, and to open another front line and to begin the battle for all these small villages and towns in direction of the city by the name of Zaporizhzhia. So to summarize everything, the situation is critical. The Ukrainians Zelensky himself decided to focus and to invest everything. They have the military forces, armored vehicles, infantry, troopers, mobilization, everything to Kharkiv, with the purpose not even to give a chance, a second to think to anybody that Ukrainians can lose Kharkiv, because he understands if Ukraine lose Kharkiv, Zelensky will lose everything. Meanwhile, the Russians are taking one village after another all over the entire territory. And when to summarize everything, during the next few days, the Ukrainians are going to lose completely Berestove, Stepovo Novoselovka, probably Sporная, Bilogorovka, we are going to receive some geolocations, as I understand. Chasiv Yar, the eastern block, is going to fall. Most likely Kalinovka to the north of Chasiv Yar is going to fall. Obviously, the Russians are going to capture Novoalexandrovka in the vicinity of Arkhangelsk. The Russians are going to start capture Paraskovyevka and Konstantinovka. Staromayorsk, Urozhaina are about to fall maybe within the next few days. Also, the Russians are planning to start few more front lines in Zaporizhzhia direction. So probably I counted more up to 10 towns and villages that Ukrainians are going to lose just because in favor of Kharkiv. It's a very bad situation, because after this defense belt we just discussed that the Ukrainians are going to lose, there are no more defense belts further. No more, nothing more. And then nobody knows where exactly the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.